This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, can you see my screen okay? All set? Okay, great. Hello everyone, welcome to our session. Thank you for joining us today. It looks like we have quite a few people here, and I will go ahead and talk very slowly as we introduce today's session so that we can have a few more people join us. As advertised right there, we are talking about awarding the Seal of Biliteracy in New Jersey using ACTFL assessments. I will go ahead and go to the next slide, which has our, I guess I will call them panelists or presenters or however you'd like to call us. We have Emily Huff. She is not from New Jersey, although I just learned a few minutes ago that she has never been to New Jersey. Is that right, Emily? Is that at all possible?
That is very, very possible, yeah.
Wow,
True.
that's amazing. So if any of you have an extra guest room or anything like that, and you would like to put Emily up for a little while, she is dying to visit your beautiful state. We also have Michele Schreiner here. I would imagine that the vast majority of you know and love her already. If you don't know and love her, leading up to today, I'm sure you will after today. And then of course, last and definitely least is me. I'm Andrew Bowen. I am coming to you from LTI. We are the exclusive administrators of all ACTFL assessments. And of course, those ACTFL assessments include, but are not limited to, the APPL, the AAPPL, which will be one of our main topics of focus today. I will go ahead and start out by saying that all three of us will be sharing plenty of information. We will be stopping periodically to take on questions, but for the most part, we will be looking at questions towards the end of today's session so that we can make sure that we have plenty of time to get around to all the questions and comments that you're able to leave. I know Salvatore is gonna be here to help facilitate that, but I will be keeping an eye on the questions and comments box in the lower right-hand section of your screen. So to take a quick look at today's agenda, of course, we will give an overview of all ACTFL assessments. We get a lot of questions out of New Jersey as far as which languages are offered in ACTFL assessments. So we will give a quick rundown as far as this year's updates go. We will then shift quickly into our at-home proctoring methods. This, believe it or not, is no longer new to us. So most folks in the state of New Jersey had the great fortune of doing a lot of their proficiency testing in the months of January, February, fortunately before the pandemic hit. A lot of other states weren't so lucky, so they were doing their testing in March, April, May. So of course, LTI and ACTFL had to move quickly in order to make these assessments accessible. And we will go over exactly how that's done. And of course, we have Emily Huff here from Iowa, who has been through the entire experience herself. As promised, here is our rundown of all ACTFL assessments that are being used to award the Seal of Biliteracy nationwide. Of course, the APPL, the AAPPL, is the most commonly used ACTFL assessment in order to award the Seal of Biliteracy. It is currently available in 13 languages, with a 14th being added this year. That 14th, as you see right there on the screen, is going to be American Sign Language. We're all very excited about that. There's also an assessment, a lot of you are familiar with this one. It is called the ALIRA. That is our assessment for Latin that students can use to earn the Seal of Biliteracy. New last year was the ACTFL OPI and WPT bundle. And of course, the goal of coming out with this bundle with ACTFL was to make the Seal of Biliteracy accessible to speakers and learners of less commonly taught languages. So as you see right there, we went ahead and added to the list of 14, 15 languages with those 22 additional, and we'll call them less commonly taught, less commonly tested languages. A lot of folks throughout New Jersey took advantage of this assessment last year. And of course, you will have the opportunity to do so again this year in a remote virtual setting. There's also we call it the flagship ACTFL assessment, which is the OPI, the Oral Proficiency Interview. And of course, as it has been for a while now, this assessment is available in over 120 languages. Jumping right into the APPL, of course, one of the main reasons why this assessment is so commonly used to award the Seal of Biliteracy is the ease of administration, right? So we're looking at all 4 skills, we're looking at all 3 modes of communication, looking at the interpretive mode, interpersonal, and presentational modes. And believe it or not, the entire experience is online. So as Michele will speak to, she's used to seeing her students take it in a classroom setting. So we will see this assessment administered in either classrooms or sometimes cafeterias, language centers, or computer labs, if those even still exist. I think I just dated myself. But it is administered on the computer, 100% online, which makes the transition to this virtual, online environment a little bit easier. Each of the sections are completely independent of one another. So I'm sure Michele will speak to this too. So it is not required that the students sit down and, for 2.5 hours straight and knock out the entire assessment. What we can do is we can administer, one section one day, another section the next day, and kind of piece them all together as we test for proficiency. It is K through 12 focused content, and it is refreshed yearly by ACTFL. All of these assessments are developed and the content is refreshed by the ACTFL Center for Assessment and Research and Development. So we know exactly where the content is coming from. We also know exactly who is rating these assessments. So the speaking and writing sections of these assessments are of course sent to live raters, and these are ACTFL certified raters who have been trained by ACTFL to scan through these writing or speaking clips and rate them on the ACTFL proficiency scale. And here we have Michele. We have a series of questions for her. Some of these were collected by me from some of you, and others were just kind of thrown at her randomly. No, I'm just kidding. She had a little bit of time to prepare for it. But as she goes through these questions, again, we will kind of save our questions, comments towards the end of this section, and then we will address anything that comes up from the attendees. Michele, could you address the first question for us? I'm gonna go ahead and adjust my screen so I can see it. There we go. For how long have you been administering ACTFL assessments to students?
So I've been administering the APPL and the ALIRA since 2015. So it's been 6 years now. We started in 15. This past school year, the 1920 school year, was the first time I administered in addition, the OPI and the WPT. So just 1 year experience with those.
Okay, and a follow-up question there. For which languages have you administered these assessments?
So ALIRA, of course, is Latin, French, German, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Hindi. This year, with the additional languages, Albanian, Vietnamese, Bulgarian, and Gujarati.
Great, that is quite the list. Thank you. We will go ahead and move on to the next slide here. What are a few of the benefits your program has seen since you began proficiency testing?
Yeah, so this question, when we first started, the first year, I would say in 2015, I expected to learn about the students' strengths and weaknesses, but I hadn't really considered that administering proficiency testing would bring benefit to the program as a whole. So that was a pleasant surprise. I would say overall, for us early on, we had a recognition of, okay, we thought we did a lot of speaking practice. Nope, we need a whole lot more. We from the very beginning, incorporate speaking in our elementary program, our middle school program, but by and large, we recognized, oh no, we need to do a whole lot more. all year long, lots and lots of talking. That's the only way that students will be comfortable just answering spontaneous questions. You know, you have to have that spontaneous practice in addition to the rehearsed practice. The rehearsal is important, but practicing, you know, just some spontaneous topics and just getting kids more comfortable with speaking all the time. That was really, I would say, a benefit for us in terms of just recognizing that we needed to do a lot more of that. And then I would say another benefit, not just for me, for the teachers in the department as a whole, I think we really had an opportunity to observe for ourselves the difference between performance and proficiency. That's one of the things you're taught, you know, if you go to a workshop, performance is not the same as proficiency. But seeing it for yourself with your own students, when you know, okay, we've done that. Okay, we've done that. Wow, they didn't do so well in those areas. Sometimes that happens. Just because a student's performance on a performance assessment, you know, might have been really strong, it was just performance. It was, you know, practiced, it was rehearsed, and may not have led to the level of proficiency that we had expected. So I think that was just helpful for us to see and to get a better understanding of the difference between proficiency and performance.
Wonderful. The proficiency and performance topic is something that we could, I mean, we could not only fill this session, but we could probably do a half-day session on that alone. It's definitely fascinating, and an assessment like the Apple really does help us to show not only what we're doing as far as transitioning our students from performance to proficiency, but also, as Michele mentioned, taking a look at each of the modes of communication separately. Although our goal as language educators is to kind of merge all those together and get their proficiency moving up equally, right? It's important to be able to kind of distinguish, okay, as Michele said, our students' interpersonal listening and speaking capabilities are lagging behind a little bit. Whereas their, you know, reading, interpretive listening, maybe presentational writing skills are through the roof. Now, what can we do to essentially adjust the curriculum, right, and make sure that we are getting those students caught up as far as their speaking abilities go, which it's very clear that Michele and her colleagues have done a great job of doing. Okay, next question. What feedback have you received from students about the Apple?
So this is a tough question to answer because, quite honestly, every student's an individual and each student's experience is different. So they all have their own opinions of the assessment. It really does vary based on the student. If I have to generalize, I would say overall, the students who are your risk takers in terms of the ones who are okay being uncomfortable, and the ones that are, you know, that try to say things maybe that they haven't learned how to say, the students who readily practice circumlocution, that do, you know, try to use as much as the vocabulary as they can to talk about things and to write about things. Those are the students that by and large have the best experience overall. I have found it in my experience. The students who I would say more, you know, play by the rules, only give you so much in class. If they answer a question, they answer a question, but they don't go beyond. You know, the ones where you really have to pull it out of them and you're saying, okay, give me more details, give me more details. Those are the students that have more difficulty, because as much as we say, you know, and I remind the students when they're sitting in front of me and we're proctoring, okay, talk as much as you can, say as much as you can, write as much as you can. For students who've been doing that for their whole language career, it's second nature to them, and they will do that on the assessment. For students who've never really done that, it's a lot harder when they're taking the assessment for biliteracy. And, they realize that, I can't really study for this test. There are some students that stay with the language, that think, okay, I'll study for that test. I'm going to take it and I'm going to do well. But if they really haven't been working at their language proficiency all along, it's just not possible. It's not a test that they can study for. Really, you can certainly review some vocabulary. You can look at ACTFL. Does a great job of sharing the topics, that students should be able to, to write about, to speak about, but they're broad. The students don't know what the specific questions are going to be, of course, until the day of the assessment, and they have to rely on their own preparation. So their feedback, it varies. I don't think I answered your question very well. I'm sorry.
No, you did actually. And can you see the topics right there on the screen?
Yes.
I'm glad you brought that up because that is something that we hear pretty often as well. Not directly from students usually, but from teachers, administrators, is there a study guide? What can I give to my students 2 months before the apple, or the night before the apple? If it's the night before the apple, as Michele has already kind of articulated, well, that's kind of tough because there's no cramming, certainly, for a proficiency-focused assessment like the apple. But something that is very useful for us as language educators is to have these apple topics on hand. So this is just an example that I've put up on the screen here. What I can do is, if I know that my goal for my students is going to be in that intermediate mid, intermediate high range, what I can do is I can take a look at the topics. And of course, this is not something that I can simply, put my name at the top and this is my syllabus and I'm all set kind of thing. But this is something that we can certainly use as a reference, right? Essentially to make sure that that we're covering topics that are not only relevant to the apple, but are relevant to the ACTFL can-do statements, that are relevant to the ACTFL proficiency guidelines. All of this content comes directly from those ACTFL resources. Again, this is an ACTFL created assessment, so the creators of those resources are the creators of the assessment, right? Which is quite nice to have. Again, it's a nice reference. It's something that can certainly be cited at the beginning of the year and throughout the year as we kind of set our students on this trajectory towards their proficiency goals. But is it something that we can send to students the night before who are looking to cram for the assessment? That's where it gets kind of tough, right? Okay, let's go back to where we were. Okay, so what would you say, Michele, are the key features of the apple?
I think your writers do a really good job creating questions that are relevant to teenagers overall, that the kids want to write about and kids want to talk about as much as possible, within the confines of course, this is an assessment. But the questions I find to be, very well geared to high school students, which, are the ones that are taking this assessment for the Seal of Biliteracy. That and I think the interpersonal speaking section, quite honestly, it's so full of varied questions. And, I say to students, don't panic. If you can't answer a question, there are lots more. You have an opportunity to show what you know. That's one of the, I think, a key feature of the assessment is that there are so many opportunities in that interpersonal speaking section in particular for the students to, some of them really do kind of overcome their nerves if they start out very nervous in the beginning and maybe are just giving some, short sentence answers. Maybe they're not necessarily connecting their sentences together the way we want them to. They kind of warm up as the questions go along. And honestly, it's my favorite day of the entire year when students are taking the interpersonal speaking assessment, because I just love to stand in the back of the room and listen to the different languages, you know, and I grin from ear to ear, because that's, you know, that's what we're working towards, students being able to just speak the language. And I love, there are always a few students, you know, that are nodding their heads along, you know, with you know, to the person on the screen, and maybe they're moving their hands, they're gesturing while they're talking, and they just, it's as if they're having a conversation, you know, with a live human being right at that moment. And I think that, you know, the test is really well done to be able to pull that out of students.
Wonderful. That is certainly my favorite section as well. And what we have on the screen right here are examples of each of the 4 sections, right? So the interpersonal listening and speaking section that Michele was referencing is in the top left corner of your screen. This is just a screenshot of the English version. And Michele mentioned that there are quite a few prompts. To be exact, there are 18 different prompts in this section. So it is very much, and of course, this young lady on the screen, I believe her name is Emily. And again, this is from the English version of the assessment. So she's speaking to me in English. I'm being prompted to respond back to her in English. And of course, I'm being prompted to ask her questions back, right? Am I being prompted to get all animated and start using my hands and get all crazy as Michele's students do? No, but we do see that quite often, which is very entertaining for us as educators. But again, this is a 30-minute, 18 prompt back and forth simulated live chat, which is truly unique. I have never seen a language assessment like this anywhere. The other sections over on the right, we see the 2 interpretive sections. So top right is going to be interpretive reading, and then bottom right is going to be interpretive listening. So students will have either read or listened to audio clips, semi-authentic audio clips in the target language, and they're able to interact with the screen. So drag and drop type activities to remain engaged in order to show their comprehension. And then of course, the bottom left section is going to be that presentational writing section where students are given the option to either use different keyboards. So for instance, Mandarin Chinese, they're able to use the Pinyin keyboard, or if it's a Roman-based alphabet language such as Spanish, Portuguese, French, I can simply click on that little toolbox to insert my special characters. And we'll go ahead and move on to the next question. What trends have you and your colleagues noticed as you analyze proficiency data? So we're kind of shifting from the, you know, students' perspective to the
medical mask on top of that.
Oh.
The face with a face shield and full PPE like you're going into surgery. He goes.
Looks like somebody is talking about some exciting masks, but we can certainly talk about that after the Seal of Biliteracy session. So what was I saying? Let's see. Trends that you've noticed as far as analyzing proficiency data goes. So shifting from the student experience to the teacher administrator experience. You know, what do we get? What can we see after our students have taken an assessment like the Apple or the Alira or the OPI-WPT for the Seal of Biliteracy?
Yeah, so overall, that's the exciting part, you know, looking at the results and not just, you know, overall, but seeing in particular, okay, each of the 4 sections, that's really what I like to look at. And one of the trends I have noticed, we noticed early on, our students did, you know, our scores were very strong with the reading section, the interpretive reading section, and the interpretive listening section. So as, you know, the department supervisor, that was very validating for me. I thought, okay, great. You know, those are our strengths. And I attribute that to the fact that we use teacher-generated thematic units in elementary school, middle school, and high school. and we use authentic resources. So our students are accustomed to seeing authentic resources, and they're accustomed to, hearing authentic speakers of the target culture, in the language, different accents, not only their teacher. So the students, by and large, perform well in those particular areas, I would have to say. Just that has been really, really nice to see. Now, that doesn't, that's not to say every now and then we'll have a student who doesn't do well on the listening section, and we have to kind of consider that particular student and say, okay, why didn't she do so well on the listening section? And sometimes there's just, something about a particular student and for whatever reason, why she didn't do well on that. Or, quite honestly, with the reading section, the students, of course, have to be able, the directions are in English. And so some students may not be, maybe the language they're taking the assessment in is a heritage language for them, and maybe their English isn't all that strong. Well, this, of course, is an assessment for biliteracy, and the students have to demonstrate proficiency in English as well. So, students need to recognize that, okay, they need to expect the directions to be in English, and they need to make sure that they're following them. We all have students who follow directions, who read the directions, and then sometimes you have students who just don't. We try our best as educators to, to explain to them, okay, you're going to have to do this, you're going to have to do this, make sure you read, and sometimes they don't. That happens. But overall, I would say it's nice to see those results. I like that they're broken down by the particular mode of communication. And I think it's important for the students to recognize their own strengths. And, I say to the students, we all have our own strengths and our own weaknesses. This may show you one particular area that you need to work on more. Maybe it is the presentational writing. Maybe a student had difficulty with that section. Maybe the student's very verbal and speaks very well, but just needs to work on the writing a bit. Or, it could be the reading section, any of the four. I like to encourage the students to, to expect a different level in the different modes of communication, because proficiency is, development is not linear. It's not going to develop at the same rate in every student. And really the results show that when we look at them.
Wonderful. And as Michele mentioned, I mean, we can, one of the many benefits to proficiency assessment is looking at, each particular student. So we see, the score report right there in the middle. As Michele mentioned, each of the four sections, a completely separate score, and for good reason, right? So we've got interpersonal listening and speaking up top. And this is just sample data, but it does give us a good example of, okay, so this student is doing really, really well with his or her interpersonal listening and speaking, but the interpretive mode is well, at least interpretive reading is lagging behind a little bit. So let's take a look at this particular student and see what we can do to make sure that those reading skills are bumped up a little bit. Over on the right, bottom right, I should say, is a way for us to take a look at not just one student, but an entire classroom, an entire school, or an entire district or state of students, and essentially compare, well, not only take a look at trends within our own classroom or within our own school, right? So if everyone in our classroom or in our school is through the roof with interpersonal listening and speaking, but lagging behind in the interpretive mode of communication, then we can take a look at maybe the curriculum, maybe it's some of the activities that we have in the classroom, and perhaps look at some more authentic or semi-authentic reading materials that we can either address in the classroom or send them home with. In addition to that, we can, of course, compare, if we want to, compare our students to national averages. So the example, I know it's very small, but in the bottom right, what I've done is I've filtered out. I want to take a look at just my Mandarin Chinese learners. I want to take a look at just secondary high school as opposed to middle school or elementary school. And I want to see how they stack up. with those same filters applied to the tens of thousands of students who are taking the Apple for Mandarin Chinese at the secondary high school level. So tons of things we can do with this data. Again, it's something that we could talk for 2 hours about, but in the interest of time, we'll have to stop ourselves a little bit. And then of course, new last year is the top right. Every single student who takes the Apple or the OPI WPT or the ALERA for that matter receives that ACTFL certificate of proficiency, which is nice to have. Of course, you know, many students are earning the Seal of Biliteracy. And for those students who do earn the Seal of Biliteracy, now they have 2 language credentials. For the students who are either beginning learners, maybe they're in elementary school, maybe they're in middle school, or they are junior seniors who have fallen just short of the Seal of Biliteracy requirements, they at least have this ACTFL certificate so that they can, I don't know, if they're applying for a summer job or even applying to college, they can use this certified language credential that has a validation code with ACTFL so that they can say, hey, oh, gone are the days where, and I've said this myself, oh, I can speak some Spanish, I'm okay, I'm fluent, right? But with the certificate, we can say, yes, I'm proficient, I am, you know, I can speak at the intermediate high level, so on and so forth, right?
So Andrew,
Okay.
I noticed
Sure.
there was one other trend that I forgot to mention. This year in particular, our results showed us when we looked at the students who didn't do so well on the speaking, there was a trend that jumped out. The students who didn't do so well on the speaking really had a very hard time asking spontaneous questions. And that was something I as a department, we, you know, realized, okay, do we spend enough time practicing the asking of the questions and the generating of questions, even more so than asking? Because when we do our interpersonal assessments, we give our students opportunities to ask and answer questions of one another, but perhaps those questions are more rehearsed because they're practiced in the context of a particular thematic unit. And we haven't really spent as much time as we need to on generating questions, because of course that's such an important, you know, skill for a student with language proficiency development, is being able to ask for something if you need it.
Sure. Yeah, very interesting trend. And I'm sure the way that you found that trend, or at least part of it, was the ability to not only see the scores of the students, but to go in the teacher admin portal and actually listen to what the students said on test day. So we can not only, again, you know, see the score descriptions, but listen for ourselves and say, okay, student A, what we did well here was this, this, and that. What we could use some work on was this, this, and that, which is great for not only the speaking samples, but also the writing samples.
Oh yes, that feature, Andrew, is invaluable because, you know, if a particular student perhaps is upset at not doing so well on a particular section, you know, they may say to you, but I answered the questions. Well, then we go and listen and we recognize, well, you might have answered the questions, but, you know, you didn't use strings of sentences. Your sentences were isolated sentences. They weren't connected. Your vocabulary wasn't varied. It was certainly not, you know, at the intermediate, mid, or beyond level.
Sure. Great. Okay. And last but certainly not least, how does the process for awarding the Seal of Biliteracy look in Egg Harbor Township? I went ahead and stole a few images from Facebook, Twitter. They're all over the internet as far as the you know, the congratulatory messages go. But Michele, please speak to the process of, you know, after the assessment awarding the Seal of Biliteracy in New Jersey.
So we do our testing in January because the results need to get reported to the New Jersey Department of Education early in February. So there's specific information that the New Jersey Department of Ed requires for each student. So not only, of course, do you have to report the student's results on all 4 parts of the Apple assessment, but you have to report, well, what assessment did that student pass to demonstrate proficiency in English? You have to report who is a current English learner, who's a former English learner. For your former English learners, how many years ago did they exit ELL classes? You have to report for, how many years has each student been studying the language taken in the assessment. All that information goes into a spreadsheet that gets uploaded into New Jersey homeroom system to the Department of Education. And sometime in June this year, districts were sent a file and were given access to print their own certificates for students. So what I do is I present, all of the seals of biliteracy at our senior awards night. To me, it's very important to have as wide an audience as possible, to be able to explain to the audience, what is the seal of biliteracy? Not just that the audience sees how many students, certainly that's important, but I want the audience to learn a little bit about the assessment. I usually try to mention one of the questions perhaps that students have to talk about, and I'll say in particular, a couple of years ago, I remember saying to the audience, this is not an easy assessment that the students had to take, when they're answering questions for the interpersonal speaking. One of the questions is, so tell me about a book that you have read recently. I think a particular question like that, just sharing that with the audience members, parents in particular, never had an experience like their students are having for what a proficiency assessment is. It's, they might think that the students are just sitting down and we're giving them a grammar test, which of course this is nothing of the sort. It's important for them to recognize what biliteracy really means, and for students to be able to share with their, not just with their family, but with, Board of Education members, upper administration members, people who come to present other scholarships that have no knowledge whatsoever of, what proficiency assessment means. I like to really share that with as wide an audience as possible. Usually, as you see here, I like to take a group photo. I was so bummed this year that just wasn't possible. So there's no 2020 group photo in front of the high school, unfortunately. But I'm hopeful maybe 2021, we'll see what next school year brings, right? I think we're all kind of wondering anxiously. But I think it's important for not just for the students, but for the growth of the program. You have to consider there's somebody in the audience who brought a little brother or sister, and that student is going to be sitting there listening and thinking, oh, I want to graduate with that, even if they aren't sure what it is. That's where it's important to promote the seal of biliteracy, because you just never know who might in turn come to support the seal of biliteracy the more they hear about it.
Absolutely, and the New Jersey Department of Ed does, they do it right for sure. So all schools, all districts, and of course including Egg Harbor, are essentially what we call sub-accounts under the New Jersey Department of Ed, right? So they can see all of this data, and they can, of course, each school, each district is different, but the data does automatically bubble up if requested, right? So that there doesn't have to be that manual transition of, hey, these students, have attained the award and these ones haven't, so on and so forth. Looking at the seal of biliteracy in general, I always like to show both this slide and the one coming up. So the seal of biliteracy, of course, is not just a New Jersey thing. It is something that has taken the nation by storm. Of course, it all started out in California, but what we see right here is, all of those dark blue states, those are states that currently have legislation in place that allows schools, districts, and of course, private and public schools to award the Seal of Biliteracy, depending on the state. The yellow states are still kind of working on it, same as the green right there. But I know that Arthur Chu, the creator of the Seal of Biliteracy, is working hard to get legislation passed and the rest. This is another slide that I love to show, because it really kind of allows us as a state to kind of check in, right? So looking at the 2019 National Seal of Biliteracy report, and of course this is available right on sealofbiliteracy.org. I've got the link right down there, and of course I've shared this entire presentation online so that you can access it. But we did have, or I should say, over 100,000 seals of biliteracy issued in 2018. We're still waiting on the 2020 report to come out to show the 2019 data. But 66 world languages, and of course they're all listed right there. The state with the most seals, we're looking at California, my goodness, almost 56,000 seals of biliteracy. And the state with the most linguistic diversity, we're looking at the state of Washington with 59 languages in which they awarded the Seal of Biliteracy. If we look over on the left, we can see New Jersey there. We've got, what is it, 3,700 seals of biliteracy. And again, these are the 2018 numbers. The 2019 numbers are soon to come. And then, of course, looking at 2020, something that's quite encouraging. We look at a state like Illinois. I was just speaking with a district supervisor there, and they actually set a new record this past year, even though their testing is done in April, May. So looking at these virtual platforms on which we're testing, on which we're seeing schools being run, it is still very much a possibility to test for the Seal of Biliteracy, and of course, award the Seal of Biliteracy to these students who have worked so hard year after year to reach that achievement. And then, of course, the benefits of the Seal of Biliteracy, Michele has already covered, I believe, all of these, so it's nothing that I necessarily have to repeat. Over on the right, we see an example of some of the medals that are optional to hand out during award ceremonies for the Seal of Biliteracy. Something that's very interesting to me is, of course, that first bullet point right there. The recognition of the value of language learning, but not only language learning, but also, observing and honoring heritage languages, right? And I love Michele's example. Maybe there's a little brother, little sister in the audience who is seeing, big brother, big sister, receiving this medal, receiving this seal on their diploma, and all of a sudden, wait a second, I speak 3 languages, and hey, that's kind of cool now. I can be up on that stage in 2 years getting that same award. So it really is recognizing, again, students for their hard work, whether it's learning as a second, third, fourth, or even 5th language. It looks like we have one question. I will break quickly for a question for Michele, and then we'll go ahead and move on to testing in an online environment. The question is, if the test is to measure proficiency, would the former practice affect the result accuracy? I think there are a couple of different ways that this question can be interpreted. I believe this popped up when we were talking about the Apple topics that are released by ACTFL every year. The way that I interpret that is, if an educator has seen the list of topics 1 year and then administer the test to students that year, is it going to affect the students, how the students do on the test the next year? Is that how you interpret it, Michele?
Yes, I think so, Andrew.
Okay. So I can go ahead and answer that. And of course, Michele, you're more than welcome to weigh in as well. The content of the Apple is refreshed every single year. And of course, again, this is done by the ACTFL Center for Assessment Research and Development. And because of that, the Apple topics that are released every year are released new every year, right? So it's not just the same topics being used over and over and over again, the same prompts on the test being used over and over, the content used. It's all refreshed. In fact, in 2020, it was 100% renewed, all of the content. So if I have a group of students who took the Apple to try to earn the Seal of Biliteracy last year, and I administer the Apple to them again this year, it will be a completely different experience. And again, we're looking at, performance versus proficiency because it is a proficiency-based assessment. Students will never know what they're going to see on the assessment. They will never know what the prompts are going to be. Again, there's no way that they can cram the night before to study for a test like this. It is the Apple is really truly meant to elicit the highest level of proficiency as far as the student's abilities can take them. Michele, anything to add to that?
No, I think you've answered that.
Okay, great. Okay, another question that just popped up. What is the difference between the Seal of Biliteracy and the AP in terms of benefits for the students? Michele, you want to take a stab at that one?
Well, of course, the AP assessment, some colleges will award college credit for. It is my hope at some point that will be the case for the Seal of Biliteracy assessment as well. In my own personal opinion, I feel that this assessment is more valuable because you're not teaching just to a test. The AP assessments are, the cumulative result of many years of learning. It's just a completely different type of an assessment. The speaking on the AP test is very different from the speaking on the Seal of Biliteracy assessment. This is more natural. As Andrew mentioned, it's intended to, to simulate a conversation, a back and forth between two people, which is, much more of a natural conversation, whereas the goal on the AP assessment is, preparation for a 2-minute presentational speaking. It's the goals are just quite different.
And another question, it's actually kind of related to the last one. If a student wants the seal for their college app, that means that he or she must take it junior year. Of course, that depends. They can take it senior year. Mm-hmm. A nice thing about the Apple is the quickness with which the scores come back, right? So if I take the Apple today, my scores could come back tomorrow or the next day. Absolute maximum window is going to be 10 business days, right? So we're not looking at waiting months for those scores to come back. Sorry, go ahead.
We have our students take the assessment in senior year, and I say to them, on your college, on your transcript, we won't put your receipt of the Seal of Biliteracy until you have received it. However, when you're applying, you can certainly say candidate for the Seal of Biliteracy because all of the students are candidates for the Seal of Biliteracy. They're taking that assessment in their senior year, and then they can let the college know as soon as they get their results.
Great. And we have a follow-up question here. If a student takes a test for the Seal of Biliteracy, they don't have to take the AP. So I think this points out a difference between the two, right? So, in order to take the AP test, I have to be in an AP program, right? Although there are plenty of students who are in AP programs who also take the Apple to show their proficiency, right?
Yes.
Any student can take the Apple. Of course, that's not limited to any age group. That's not limited to, of course, there's a wide variety of languages in which students can take the Apple or the OPI-WPT in order to earn the Seal of Biliteracy. Go ahead, Michele.
Correct. No, correct. Okay. I like to say to the students, you'll get your results of the Seal of Biliteracy assessment by the end of January. And then if they are if they're in the AP class, then they have until May to address their own individual weakness. They can see where their strengths are, and perhaps there's an area that they really need to focus on if they hope to do really well on the AP assessment. They still have time, but the two are just completely different assessments.
Absolutely. And a great comment here from Paola. The Seal of Biliteracy is also something a student can put on their resumes for life. whereas the AP is not listed on a resume for a job. I emphasize this as well to students.
Yes, she's absolutely correct. I say to them, put this on your resume. Do not put it in little print. I say, put it at the top and leave it there until you're in your 50s, because it's not just, Paula's absolutely right. This is a skill that they have for life.
Absolutely. Okay, I just realized what time it is. Unfortunately, we are limited to only 10 minutes. I'm very sorry, Emily. It looks like you know, the Apple logistics have kind of stolen the show, but we will go ahead and shift gears to ACTFL assessments in an online environment. Again, this is something that Emily, being in Iowa, was able to experience. Emily, was it in April, May last year?
It was the end of April. We took it at the end of April.
Okay, great. And again, the folks in New Jersey were able to get most of their testing done before the pandemic hit. Most other states were not so lucky. So all of these options, the ones that you see on the screen right here, were made available as quickly as we could. The middle of March to the end of March was a complete whirlwind on the LTI ACTFL side to shift all of these assessments online. Fortunately, a lot of our assessments had already been in an online platform, right? So looking at remote proctoring, virtual proctoring. But something that was new as of earlier this year is the at-home parent/guardian proctoring option, which I will go ahead and tell you that the vast majority of Apple and Alira users did take advantage of that in March, April, May of this year, of 2020. One of the main reasons you see in the third row right there is the additional cost. It comes at an additional cost of big fat $0. And of course, all instructions are provided to not only teachers and administrators, but also to parents and guardians. We also do have a computer proctoring option. This is a virtual proctoring option, and it is available to students who are 13 years old and above, of course, in order to be COPA compliant. It is available on Chromebooks, desktops, laptops. The proctoring option, as far as looking at parents and guardians, proctoring goes, this is available across Chromebooks, desktops, laptops, and tablets, because what we're doing here is we are administering the Apple, which is an HTML5 assessment and can be administered on any device. Again, there are step-by-step instructions provided to parents, guardians. These are now available in 22 languages, and of course, ACTFL is taking requests on a school-by-school, district-by-district basis for additional parental instructions to send home with kids. So Emily, this is going to be a crash course on at-home Apple administration. First and foremost, why did you choose to go with the parent/guardian proctoring option as opposed to the virtual proctoring option?
Because we were planning on doing it in the classroom, and you know, the pandemic just completely flipped everything, and everybody was so confused as to what we were doing in March and April. We wanted something that felt as similar to a classroom setting as possible, just because the kids were very confused themselves and kind of like very worried about this whole process. And we just felt that the parent guardian proctoring option was the most similar to me in the classroom watching them take the test. And they wouldn't have to worry about the webcam watching them, or if they got interrupted, a brother and sister was in the room or something, it would still be, you know, they wouldn't get interrupted and it would be okay. So we just felt that the parent guardian proctoring option was most similar to the teacher proctored classroom model, and it would be more comfortable for the kids.
Makes a ton of sense, absolutely. I'll go ahead and move on to the next question since we're in fast forward mode. What resources did you use for guidance as you made your way through the process?
Really felt that like the information you can find on the testing web, there you go, on the website, there's PDFs available and videos are super informative and helpful, and there's no way to, you know, like I feel like they gave everything to the students and to the parents as far as like how this is going to work and what you need to do. It was just very, very helpful. So as far as the actual how do we do this proctoring, the information was there. And And all they had to do was read it. So any problems we had just came down to the fact that the parents and the students chose not to read any of the information. But the information that was on the website was pretty good. As far as the actual test, we've talked a lot about the test, and I just prepped them a little bit on like what does it mean to be proficient. You can't prep them on how to study for the test, as we already mentioned, but I just reminded them, some things about interpersonal speaking that will level you up. What does it mean to be proficient? Like we talked about some different reminders of things like that. But as far as the whole process there, what you have on your screen is pretty helpful.
Wonderful. And yeah, thanks, Emily. As Michele mentioned earlier, we could send 10,000, guides and manuals to students, and we just don't know whether or not they're going to read them, right? Which is why ACTFL came up with these wonderful little YouTube videos, just short clips, right? So 2, 3, 4 minutes long, that students can watch, that parents, guardians can watch in order to really simplify the process. Okay, how did you get testing information to the parents and guardians?
We emailed.
Hold up on the screen here.
Oh yeah, that is me. We emailed everybody. We made some documents. We edited some of the original ACTFL documents to include specific testing information. One of our big things was we had to logistically get money from all the students. So we had to figure out a process of you have to drive by my house and put $20 in the mailbox sort of thing. So we, communicated all that with the students and parents through email, and then phone calls and social media messages if necessary. Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned that anecdote, Emily, with the money in the mailbox. So we do have, to be released next month, actually, a way for students to pay for their own assessments. Finally,
yes.
Looking at the Apple, students can order and pay for their own online there. So we no longer have to turn them into post office delivery folks with cash, especially.
It felt very shady, but it was good.
I'm sure, yeah. And we'll go ahead and I'll check in with Salvatore after this question to make sure we're okay on time. But Emily, what feedback did you hear from parents and guardians, as well as students, as far as the process goes?
It was kind of overwhelming, the gratitude that so many of the parents shared. Our school board actually gave a special thank you for still trying to make a way for this to be possible, because all year we had talked about the Seal of Biliteracy and we planned on it in April all year, and then of course 2020 happened. So they were just so immensely grateful that this could be an option and that we could still do it. And that, it turned out very similar to the way it would have been in the classroom as far as results and everything go. So it worked well, it worked very seamless, and they were just super grateful that we found a way to make it happen under crazy circumstances in April. So, and the parents enjoyed being proctors and having to be the person there listening to their kid speak the language for the first time. Many of them, had never heard their student use the language or before that much, and so they were like, it was amazing to sit there and have to watch my kid do this thing I didn't know that they could do. So they were just really grateful and very happy that this was an option.
That's so cool. That's great. Salvatore, how are we doing on time here?
We're just about coming to the scheduled end time, but it's okay if you need some more time. I think it's fine if you want to finish with the presentation.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I think I think it would be best to address, if possible, a few of the questions and comments from the attendees, and then we can kind of call it a day. What do you think, Michele, Emily? Are you game for that? I hate to take more time out of your schedules.
Oh, sure.
Emily, I believe you already kind of addressed this question, but how do students' ratings look? Are they what you had expected? Would you like to address that quickly?
Sure. So in Iowa, this is only our second year with the state Seal of Biliteracy. So we administered the Apple in April of 2019. And then again in 2020. So we only really have 2 years to compare it to, but I would say comparatively, They looked quite similar, or at least the things that I was expecting coming out of it. We got our lowest section was interpersonal speaking. It was a little bit lower than I would have thought. That was our area of weakness. And in talking with some of the students, I do think that being in their home environment probably made them a little bit too comfortable. For example, if I can just give a quick example, I had a student who was kind of unhappy with his score. So as Michele kind of stated, you can go back and you can look at it. And before I even said anything, he's like, I talked for over a minute on all of these prompts and I gave details and I did this. And then when I opened his test, I looked and I was like, I don't see one response here that's longer than 20 seconds. And he's like, no. For example, I talked about this for at least a minute, and I was like, that was, what was 18 seconds? And I kind of lit, and he's like, I swear it was a minute. And I was like, I think just in your head, you felt so comfortable at your house. 18 seconds really might feel like a minute when you're sitting there in your house and you're like, oh yeah, he's like, oh, I just thought I had it for sure. So I skipped to the next question. And I was like, it was 18 seconds. So I think that was kind of, they were almost too comfortable, and they didn't quite realize how, I don't know, how fast or how slow 18 seconds is, I guess. But yeah, I don't remember where I was going there. That's fine.
Okay, great. And we'll go ahead and start with questions. I see that there was one question. It was already addressed by Michele, but I will go ahead and readdress it. So there was, where was it? Oh, it was about Gujarati, right? So Michele stated that there was a student last year who took the assessment for Gujarati. So it's something that we did see a lot last year, right? With this new assessment for the less commonly tested, less commonly taught languages, who may not have necessarily typed in that language before. So ACTFL did collect a lot of feedback regarding that. And due to that feedback, we are rolling out a new option this year in order for students to be able to actually handwrite those writing sections. So for the OPI-WPT for Seal of Biliteracy, again, looking at the less commonly tested languages such as Gujarati, students are able to submit the responses in written form, and then of course they are sent online as PDFs. So another exciting development there. Let's see, was there another question that I saw? It looks like this was addressed by Michele as well. So can a heritage speaker take the exam for a language that they have not formally studied in the classroom? And the answer, of course, is a resounding yes, right? So of course, it is the majority of students who do have language training within the classroom, but there is a growing number year after year of students who do not have language training experience in a classroom, but have, learned languages at home or in the community or wherever it may be. And yes, they most certainly can take these assessments and earn themselves a Seal of Biliteracy as well. I will go ahead and put our contact information up here. If there are any follow-up questions or comments that you have for any of the three of us, you can feel free to reach out via email. Emily, was there anything you wanted to add as far as the at-home testing experience goes? Again, I feel kind of bad that our section there was cut a little bit short, but was there anything you wanted to highlight that we didn't get around to?
No, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to the all the Apple information again. I just think it's a great test for everything that Michele said, for all those reasons. And it's just really nice to know that even when things get unpredictable, that you can still offer this as an option under crazy circumstances. So no, it was great.
Yeah, and well, I guess the silver lining here is, the crazy circumstances that were last March, last April, last May aren't quite as crazy this year. At least we have a little bit of time to know at least, starting out the school year, although it is completely different, right? We're looking at virtual platforms, we're looking at hybrid programs. At least we can keep in mind from the beginning of the year the fact that, okay, the Seal of Biliteracy is something that we can still test for in January or February, or maybe March, April, May. And we can most certainly plan for that, right? Fortunately, we won't all be in the same situation that Emily was in, where, you know, we're kind of in the middle of this tornado and students are freaking out. Oh, I wanted the Seal of Biliteracy. Is it even possible? Is it this? Is it that? So at least we have some time to prepare for it. And I'm personally very grateful to FLENJ for hosting us to share this information today. I am extremely grateful to both Michele and Emily for sharing their personal experiences. Once again, if you have questions for any of the three of us, please feel free to contact us at the emails listed on the screen. Thank you, Salvatore, for looking out for us. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a nuisance to go over like this, but I think it was well worth it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. That was great. It was a lot of great information for our teachers, and we're very happy that LTI was able to be a part of our series here.
Great. Well, thank you very much to the attendees here. I will keep my fingers so tightly crossed that I can see you all in person at FLENJ next year. But you know, there's only so much we can do there, right? So again, if there are any questions, comments, please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to chat with you anytime. And once again, thank you so much, Michele and Emily.
Oh, you're very welcome.